Reichsbürger ist nur der Staatsangehörige deutschen oder artverwandten.
German citizens are only those of German or related blood, willing to serve the German rights and people. Marriages between Jews and citizens of German or related blood are prohibited.
Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers. It began with words people dismissed as harmless. In this video, we will dive straight into the largest extermination machine of the 20th century, a place where law, propaganda, and war fused into a killing apparatus powered by the indifference of an entire continent. You will see how a civilized society slid step by step into darkness until the killing of millions became a procedure. This is not just history, this is a warning about what human beings are capable of when power has no counterweight. The opening pages of the Holocaust's tragedy were not the screams inside gas chambers, but the cold lines written in the Nuremberg Laws. German citizenship is reserved only for those of German blood. A sentence that looked technical, yet it opened the door to systematic crime. When the law divides human beings into good blood and bad blood, everything that follows becomes inevitable. And then the image of SS officer Strupp calmly reporting the cleansing of the Warsaw Ghetto reveals the darkest truth: atrocity does not begin with madness. It begins with obedience. Burning an entire ghetto, letting people die in the flames or leap from windows. That was the moment law itself turned into a torch that consumed human dignity. But why did Germany fall into that spiral at all? After World War I, the nation was like a shattered body. The economy collapsed. Inflation wiped out the value of the mark, and national pride was ground into dust. In that ruin, the people did not just lose their jobs, they lost their faith in tomorrow. And when a society becomes desperate, it searches for a savior, anyone who promises to lead them out of the darkness. The question is, when an entire nation hungers for hope, can they still see the truth, or only the silhouette of the man who knows how to say what they want to hear? The rise of Adolf Hitler did not begin with bullets. It began with promises poured straight into the desperate hearts of the German people. With a voice like fire and a masterful grip on human emotion, Hitler appeared at the very moment the nation was collapsing. He promised revival. He promised jobs. He promised to restore the honor stolen at Versailles. And within those promises, propaganda became his sharpest weapon. The Nazis planted in the public a belief in the superior Aryan race, seeded hatred toward the Jews, the people accused of stabbing Germany in the back, and then seized control of the media to redefine what truth even meant. And when words have cleared the path, power follows. From the position of chancellor in 1933, Hitler swiftly dismantled every opposing party, strangled the press, and established the first concentration camps for the so-called enemies of the regime. A totalitarian state emerged within months as fear and faith mixed into a toxic glue that bound society to his will. Then came a meticulously organized anti-Jewish campaign. Jews were branded as parasites, expelled from their jobs, stripped of their property, and even forbidden to own radios or telephones. Children were forced out of schools, friends turned away, neighbors avoided them. The world saw it happening, but far too few dared to speak up. And it was that very silence that opened the space for darkness to flood in. On the night of November 9, 1938, Germany erupted in a frenzy engineered with chilling precision. Jewish synagogues went up in towering flames, more than 1,400 houses of worship, and homes burned to the ground, turning the air into a chaotic canvas of fire smoke and terror. On the streets, shattered glass spread like an endless crystal carpet, reflecting the red glow of burning buildings. Screams, the crash of collapsing windows, the crunch of boots grinding shards underfoot together, they formed a sound that could not be mistaken for anything else. The sound of a society breaking its own moral spine. And through it all, firefighters were ordered to protect only German-owned property. As for the synagogues, let them burn. But the street violence was only the opening act. When dawn broke, the machinery of repression was already waiting. Around 30,000 Jewish men were dragged away in broad daylight, shoved into concentration camps for the crime of simply existing. Families were torn apart, shops reduced to ruins, entire communities crushed in a single night. Kristallnacht was not a riot, it was the Nazi regime's open declaration of war against the Jewish people. And from that moment on, the road to the Holocaust was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability gaining speed. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, World War II officially erupted, and with it the machinery of extermination entered a phase of irreversible expansion. More than 3 million Polish Jews fell into German hands within weeks, and almost immediately the walls of the ghettos began to rise tall brick barriers, cold strands of barbed wire armed guard posts. All of it turned Jewish communities into imprisoned cities where every breath was controlled. The Warsaw Ghetto became the clearest vision of hell. Over 400,000 people were forced into an area smaller than a single district, living amid starvation, disease, and the quiet death that visited daily. Children scavenged through garbage for food, the elderly collapsed from exhaustion, and sickness spread like wildfire through dry brush. Yet even in that darkness, people clung to their last fragments of dignity, secret schools, clandestine prayers, tiny melodies that fought against despair. Even in chains, they tried to live as human beings. And the Jews were not the only ones targeted. Roma, LGBT individuals, the disabled, the mentally ill, all were marked as socially unfit. The T4 program, using gas to kill inside hidden facilities, became the draft version of what was to come. For from those rooms, the Nazis discovered the formula for the greatest crime of the 20th century, and they were about to expand it across all of Europe. When the ghetto walls in Poland began to crack under the weight of hunger and despair, the Nazi apparatus was already preparing to move into an entirely new tier of mass killing. And the opportunity to accelerate arrived in the summer of 1941, when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, that he openly described as a war of racial annihilation. This was not a war to seize territory. It was a war to erase an entire people Hitler viewed as the biological enemy of the Reich. Following the Wehrmacht were not only tanks and artillery, but the Einsatzgruppen mobile killing squads tasked with cleansing the rear. They moved from village to village, stripping people of their possessions, driving Jews out to open fields, forcing them to dig their own graves, and shooting them at point-blank range. At Babi Yar, in just 2 days, 33,000 Jews were murdered, a number so cold, so immense, that it defies imagination, yet it remains an undeniable truth. The soil there did not simply absorb blood, it was nearly drowned in it. But even at that level of barbarity, the Nazis still saw a problem. Killing with bullets was too slow, inefficient, and even caused psychological strain on the shooters. It was that inhuman calculation that opened the door to a terrifying question. If killing with guns wasn't fast enough, What would they think of next? When Barbarossa turned Eastern Europe into a vast killing ground, the Nazis quickly realized that shooting could never meet the scale they demanded. From that brutal need, the Holocaust entered its next phase, industrialized extermination, where human beings were reduced to quantities to be processed as quickly as possible. And the door to this phase opened at Chelmno. Here, Jews were told they were about to take a shower. They were herded into sealed trucks, the doors slammed shut, and the vehicle's exhaust pipe was routed directly into the compartment. Within minutes, everyone inside suffocated in a mixture of poison and despair. Chelmno was not just a crime, it was the prototype for the mass killing model the Nazis were about to replicate. When the network of death camps across Poland began operating at full capacity, the Nazis needed a center, a factory, where the killing process could reach maximum efficiency. And from the fusion of industrial thinking and genocidal ideology, Auschwitz-Birkenau was born, becoming the largest killing complex in human history. From the very gate, the phrase Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free, stood as a calculated lie, meant to conceal what waited inside. At the railway platform where trains carrying Jews from all across Europe arrived, extermination unfolded like a cold mechanical assembly line. With a single glance from an SS doctor, a nod, or a flick of the hand, each person's fate was decided. Children, women, the elderly, all were sent directly to gas chambers disguised as shower rooms, where within minutes they vanished into clouds of poison. Those deemed fit were pushed into forced labor until they collapsed and died. Auschwitz consumed more than 1.1 million lives, leaving behind ashes, hairshoes, suitcases, and even children's toys, undeniable evidence of a killing machine driven by chilling precision. And yet, even in the darkest place on earth, humanity did not vanish entirely. Acts of resistance like the Warsaw Ghetto uprising in 1943 could not alter the course of the war, but they became symbols of something enduring, that even when pushed to the last edge of existence, human beings could still choose to stand upright in the face of death. When Auschwitz was running as a death factory at maximum efficiency, the Nazis still did not stop. On the contrary, they prepared to enter the most brutal phase yet, because the war was slowly turning against them. And like every dictatorship cornered by defeat, they chose to accelerate their crimes rather than halt them. That is why the final stage of the Holocaust in 1944 became the fastest moving storm of extermination in the entire war. When Germany occupied Hungary in March 1944, they immediately targeted the last large Jewish community left in Europe. The result was staggering. In just 10 weeks, around 440,000 people were forced onto trains and sent straight to Auschwitz. This was not simply a population transfer, it was the single fastest killing operation of the entire Holocaust. Trains arrived without pause, gas chambers and crematoria ran day and night. But as the Red Army closed in, the Nazis scrambled to hide their crimes. Gas chambers were demolished, documents burned, Treblinka and Sobibor leveled to the ground in an attempt to erase every trace. Yet the scale of the atrocities was far too immense to bury beneath a thin layer of dirt. In desperation, they carried out the death marches, forced death marches, in which tens of thousands of prisoners were driven to walk hundreds of kilometers through freezing snow with no food, no water, and the certainty that anyone who collapsed would be shot on the spot. A haunting question lingers. When a regime collapses, does it drag its crimes down with it, or does it try to leave as many corpses as possible before it disappears? When the exhausted columns of the death marches dragged themselves through the ice, the machinery of the Holocaust began to crack under pressure. From three directions, the Red Army from the east, the British and Americans from the west, and the inevitable collapse of Germany itself. And it was precisely in the moment when that regime was falling apart piece by piece that the world finally saw what it had hidden for years. Liberation was not just a military victory, it was the instant when truth burst forth like a dam giving way. On January 27, 1945, Soviet forces entered Auschwitz. Battle-hardened soldiers stood frozen in shock, bodies piled in heaps, survivors reduced to skeletal shadows, and warehouses filled with children's toys, suitcases, hairbrushes, and bundles of women's hair, evidence that the scale of the crime far exceeded anything imaginable. This was not a camp, it was the physical proof of industrial genocide. Soon after the Allies uncovered many more camps, Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, Mauthausen. There, General George Patton, a man who had witnessed countless corpses on battlefields, still turned away to vomit from the stench and the horror before him. Eisenhower ordered every detail filmed, photographed, and documented because he understood if they do not see it with their own eyes, someday someone will claim it never happened. And from that moment on, no wall of lies was thick enough to hide the truth ever again. When the concentration camps were liberated and the horrifying truth stood naked before the world, the greatest question immediately emerged. After everything, what was the human cost? And the answer tragically exceeded every catastrophe humanity had ever witnessed. Around 6 million Jews were murdered, 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population, but they were not the only victims. Millions more were pulled into the gears of annihilation: the Roma homosexuals, the disabled Soviet POWs, and anyone the regime labeled as unfit to live. The Holocaust was not a massacre, it was a project to eradicate the very foundation of Europe's humanity. The survivors stepped out of the camps physically and spiritually shattered. They had escaped death but lost everything: families wiped out, homes seized, communities erased. They did not return to a homeland, they returned to an emptiness. And from that emptiness, the world was forced to confront its historical responsibility. At the Nuremberg trials, for the first time in history, the leaders of a state were prosecuted not only for war crimes, but for a new, unmistakable charge: genocide. The footage, testimonies, and evidence were laid bare to ensure that the truth could never be buried beneath ashes. Because if we do not call a crime by its true name, how can humanity hope to stop it from happening again? After Nuremberg, after the chilling testimonies and the sentences handed down to the masterminds, the world believed that justice had in some small way been restored. But justice was only the beginning. The next question, and the far more important one, was this: how does humanity ensure this never happens again? The answer leads us to the final chapter, the legacy of the Holocaust, and the warning that still echoes today. Death camps like Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, or Dachau no longer resound with screams or the smoke of crematoria, yet the silence there weighs heavier than any cry. Rusted barbed wire, crumbling brick walls, cold ground, all have become mute witnesses, telling a past no human being is ever allowed to forget. The remaining relics speak the same truth: Jewish women's haircut for reuse piles of children's shoes, desperate scratch marks clawed into gas chamber ceilings. Each lifeless object is a story cut short, a life that will never return. And the Holocaust's final message does not lie in the number 6 million, but in the lesson left for those who survived. that silence feeds evil indifference, allows it to spread. And when hatred is written into law, an entire society can be dragged into the abyss. Because if people do not speak up when evil is only beginning to form, who will be left to speak when it finally erupts into flames?